have never told this story properly before. It is not because it is unbelievable, but because every time I think about it, I feel the same tight feeling in my chest that I felt back then. I am writing this late at night, sitting alone with most of the lights on. It still feels like someone might be standing behind me, even though I know that sounds strange. At the time, I was working as a janitor in a large office building. It was not a special job. It paid the bills, and I did it mostly at night because the building was quieter and I did not have to deal with many people. I actually liked the silence at first. After a long day, it felt peaceful to move through empty hallways and clean rooms that had been busy just hours before. The building had 12 floors, plus a basement that held storage rooms, old files, and the main electrical systems. Most nights, I started on the top floor and worked my way down. By the time I reached the lower floors, it was usually after midnight. That was when the building felt different. Not scary at first, just heavy, like the air itself had settled. I had been working there for about 6 months when things started to feel wrong. Nothing dramatic happened at first. It was small things that I brushed off. Lights that were on, even though I clearly remembered turning them off. Doors that were unlocked when they should have been secured. I blamed myself. Night shifts mess with your head, and I thought maybe I was just tired. One night, while cleaning a meeting room on the 8th floor, I noticed something odd. The chairs were arranged neatly around the table, except for one at the far end. It was pulled back slightly, like someone had just stood up and walked away. I remember standing there with my mop in my hand, staring at it longer than I should have. I had cleaned that room the night before, and I always pushed the chairs in. It was part of my routine. I told myself that maybe someone from management had come in late. Still, the building logs showed no one had signed in after hours. I checked them at the security desk before continuing my shift. Seeing the empty list gave me a strange feeling, but I ignored it and kept working. As the weeks went by, the small things became harder to ignore. I would hear footsteps in hallways that should have been empty. Not loud or rushed, just slow and steady like someone walking with purpose. Every time I stopped to listen, the sound would fade away. I never saw anyone. Not once. The worst part was the basement. I hated going down there, but it was part of the job. The basement was older than the rest of the building, with concrete walls that still showed stains from decades ago. The lights were dimmer, and some corners never felt fully lit, no matter how many bulbs were replaced. One night, I found a cleaning cart down there that was not mine. It was parked near the old file storage room. The supplies on it were outdated, brands that the company stopped using years ago. The cloths were stiff and gray, like they had been used and left to dry for a very long time. I stood there, confused, trying to understand how it could be there. I reported it to my supervisor the next morning. He laughed and said the building had been through many cleaning companies over the years. He told me it was probably old equipment that had been forgotten. His tone made it clear he did not want to talk about it anymore. After that, I started to feel like I was not alone during my shifts. Even when everything was silent, I had the strong sense that someone was nearby, watching me work. I would catch myself talking out loud, saying things like, "Just finishing up," as if someone could hear me. I wish I could say I quit right then. I did not. I needed the money, and I kept telling myself that fear grows in quiet places if you let it. I believed that if I stayed calm and focused on my job, nothing bad would happen. I was wrong. After that night, I became more careful about paying attention to my surroundings. I moved slower, listened more, and double-checked everything I did. I told myself this was just what happens when you work alone for too long. Your mind fills the silence with thoughts that should not be there. Still, the feeling of being watched followed me everywhere in that building. It was not constant, but when it came, it was strong. I would be cleaning a hallway or emptying trash bins, and suddenly my skin would feel tight, like someone was standing just out of sight. I would turn around, expecting to see a coworker or a security guard, but the hallway would be empty, long, quiet, and lit by lights that hummed softly overhead. One night, I was working on the 6th floor. That floor had smaller offices, and most of them were used during the day. At night, they felt cramped and personal, like I was stepping into someone's private space. As I cleaned one office, I noticed the smell first. It was faint but strange, not like garbage or cleaning chemicals. It smelled old, like damp paper and dust that had not been touched in years. The smell seemed stronger near the corner of the room, close to the closet. I opened the door, expecting to find forgotten boxes or old files. Instead, the closet was empty. No shelves, no boxes, nothing at all. Just bare walls and a floor that looked slightly darker than the rest of the room, like it had been cleaned over and over again. I stood there longer than I should have. The smell was stronger inside the closet, and the air felt colder. I closed the door and finished cleaning as quickly as I could. As I left the room, I had the clear thought that I should not open that closet again. I did not know why, but the thought felt important. Later that same night, I heard voices for the first time. I was in the stairwell between the 5th and 4th floors. I usually took the stairs to save time. Halfway down, I heard what sounded like 2 people talking softly below me. I stopped and listened. The voices were low and unclear, like a conversation happening behind a wall. I could not understand the words, but the tone sounded calm, almost bored. I leaned over the railing and looked down. The stairwell was empty all the way to the bottom. The voices faded as I listened, until there was only silence again. I stood there with my hand on the railing, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself it was sound traveling through the building, maybe from outside or another floor. Still, I did not take the stairs again that night. A few days later, something happened that made it personal. I had my name stitched onto my uniform. One night, during my break, I sat at the small table in the janitor's room on the 3rd floor. I left my jacket on the chair and stepped out to use the restroom. I was gone for maybe 2 minutes. When I came back, my jacket was folded neatly on the table. I knew I had not folded it. What made my stomach drop was the way it was placed. The name on the chest was facing up, centered, like someone wanted it to be seen. The room was locked when I left. I checked the door again, over and over, even though I knew it had not been opened. I finished my shift in silence that night. I did not turn on the radio. I did not check my phone. I just worked and waited for the sun to come up. From that point on, I stopped feeling like the building was just old and creepy. It felt aware, like it knew I was there, and like it had decided to pay attention to me. By the time the 3rd page of this story happened in my life, I was already worn down. I was not sleeping well during the day, and every night before work, I felt a quiet sense of dread. I would sit in my car outside the building, engine off, staring at the entrance and trying to talk myself into going inside. I started noticing patterns. Things did not happen randomly. They happened when I was alone on a floor, when the building was at its quietest. It felt like whatever was there waited for the right moments, like it was being careful, One night, I arrived to find a note on the security desk. It was written on plain white paper. No logo, no official format, just handwriting. It said, "Basement needs attention tonight." That was all. The problem was that the basement was not on my schedule. I checked the cleaning list twice. There was nothing about the basement. I asked the security guard if he knew anything about the note. He looked confused and said he had not written it and had not seen anyone else near the desk. I should have ignored it. I know that now. But something about the note bothered me. It felt wrong to leave it unfinished, like skipping a step in a routine that mattered more than I understood. So later that night, I took the elevator down. The basement felt colder than usual. The lights were on, but they seemed weaker somehow. I pushed my cart slowly, listening to the sound of the wheels echo against the concrete floor. The farther I went, the stronger that old dusty smell became. Near the back, I saw the old cleaning cart again. This time, it was closer to the electrical room. It looked cleaner than before, like someone had been using it recently. A fresh cloth was draped over the handle, still slightly damp. That was when I noticed the floor. There were faint marks leading away from the cart. They were not clear footprints, but more like areas where dust had been disturbed. They led toward the electrical room door. I followed them without really thinking, my heart beating faster with every step. The door was open. Inside, the room was small and filled with panels and wires. The lights flickered slightly and the air felt heavy. Against the far wall, there was a chair. I had never seen a chair in that room before. It was an old metal chair, the kind used in schools years ago. On the chair was another note. It was written in the same handwriting as the first one. This time it said, "You missed this last time." I stood there, staring at the words, trying to understand what they meant. I had never cleaned this room. It was always locked, and it was not part of my job. The idea that someone believed I had been there before made my skin crawl. Then I heard movement behind me. Not fast, not loud, just the sound of someone shifting their weight, like they had been standing still for a long time, and finally moved. I did not turn around right away. I was afraid that if I did, I would see something I could not explain. When I finally did turn, the room was empty. The chair was still there. The note was still there. But I felt it then, clearer than ever before. I was not just being watched. I was being evaluated, like I was being compared to someone else. I left the basement without finishing anything. I did not care about the job at that point. I just wanted to get out of the building. As I reached the elevator, I looked down at my hands and noticed they were covered in dust that did not match anything I had touched. It looked like the same dust from the disturbed floor. I did not go back to the basement after that. I told the security guard I felt sick and left early. Sitting in my car, I locked the doors and just sat there for a long time, trying to calm down. Even then, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone standing behind the car, watching me. I did not sleep at all that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that chair in the electrical room and the note sitting on it, like it had been placed there with care. The words stayed in my head. "You missed this last time." I kept asking myself who the note was really meant for. That night, I called my supervisor and told him I was quitting. I did not explain everything. I just said I could not work nights anymore. He sounded annoyed, but did not push for details. Part of me wondered if he already knew something was wrong with that building and just did not want to talk about it. A week later, I went back during the day to return my uniform and keys. The building felt normal in the sunlight, busy, loud, and full of people. It was hard to believe the same place had terrified me so deeply. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined everything. Before I left, I ran into an older janitor near the supply room. He looked at me for a long moment, then asked if I'd been working nights. When I said yes, his expression changed slightly. Not surprised, just tired. He told me that years ago, there had been another janitor who worked the night shift alone, a quiet man who took his job very seriously. One morning, he did not go home. They found him in the basement days later. He had collapsed in the electrical room. The official story was a medical emergency. What stuck with me was what the older janitor said next. He said that man was known for writing notes to himself, reminders about areas that needed extra care. He believed cleanliness kept order in the building. He believed it was important. I asked what happened to his equipment. The older janitor shrugged and said some things were never cleared out properly. I returned my keys and left without looking back. I have not worked as a janitor since. I still clean my own home, but I am careful about routines now. I do not leave notes lying around. I do not ignore small changes. And I never go into basements if I can help it. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that building. I wonder if someone else is working there now, moving through the halls alone, following routines they did not create. I wonder if the building is still watching, waiting for someone who will not miss anything next time. I am sharing this here because I do not want to carry it alone anymore. If you ever work nights in a place that feels like it knows you, trust that feeling. Some jobs do not end when you clock out. I am writing this late at night, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee beside me. The apartment is quiet, and that is usually when memories come back the strongest. I have shared small parts of this story with friends before, but I have never told the whole thing from start to finish. What happened to me still feels real, even now, years later. Back then, I worked as a janitor at a public high school. It was not a bad job. The pay was decent, and I liked working after everyone had gone home. During the day, the school was loud and chaotic. At night, it felt calm, almost peaceful. Long hallways, empty classrooms, and the smell of cleaning supplies became normal to me. My shift started at 6 in the evening and ended around 2 in the morning. Most nights followed the same routine. I cleaned classrooms first, then bathrooms, then the gym area. The last place on my list was always the older wing of the school. That part of the building had been there for decades, long before modern renovations. The floors creaked more, the lights were dimmer, and the walls felt closer somehow. At first, nothing about it bothered me. I had been working there for about 3 months when I noticed the first strange thing. It was small, so small that I almost forgot about it. I was cleaning a classroom in the older wing, sweeping the floor near the teacher's desk. When I finished and looked back, there were faint marks on the floor like someone had walked through dust after I had just cleaned it. I assumed I made the marks myself and just did not remember. That happens when you work long hours alone. You stop paying attention to small details. A few nights later, something similar happened again. This time, it was in the hallway. I finished mopping, leaned my mop against the wall, and stepped into the supply closet to grab more cleaner. When I came back out, the hallway light at the far end was off. I clearly remembered leaving it on. I stood there for a moment, staring down the dark hallway. then walked over and turned it back on. I told myself not to think too much about it. As the weeks went on, the feeling of being alone started to fade. Not because someone was actually there, but because my body reacted as if I was not alone. I would get tense for no clear reason. Sometimes I would pause in the middle of cleaning, listening, even though there was nothing to hear. The school made a lot of quiet noises at night. Air vents, distant pipes, and the building settling. I knew all of that. Still, there were moments when the silence felt thick, like it was pressing against my ears. One night, while cleaning the staff bathroom, I noticed a name written lightly on the mirror, as if someone had traced it with a finger through steam. It was not my name. I wiped it away quickly and told myself it was just leftover marks from the day. But as I stared at my reflection afterward, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. The bathroom had been unused since the afternoon. There should not have been any steam at all. I finished my shift that night without incident, but the uneasiness stayed with me. I remember locking the door behind me and feeling relieved to step outside into the cool night air. I did not know then that this was only the beginning. After that night, I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking everything. Working alone can make your mind wander, and schools are old buildings with plenty of strange details. I told myself that if I stayed focused and kept my routine, the uneasy feeling would fade. It did not. Instead, the small moments started to connect, like pieces of something I did not want to see clearly. I began noticing that certain rooms felt heavier than others. The air felt thicker, and my movement slowed without me realizing it. One classroom in particular made my shoulders tense every time I walked in. Nothing about it looked different, but being there felt wrong. I also started finding doors unlocked that I knew I had locked earlier in the shift. At first, I blamed the teachers or the security guard doing rounds. But the guard told me he never entered the older wing unless he had to. He said it felt uncomfortable and joked that the place had bad memories. One night, while emptying trash bins in the hallway, I noticed something placed neatly on a windowsill. It was a ring of keys. Old ones, not the kind used anymore. They were heavier than modern keys and felt worn smooth. I picked them up, confused. They were not mine, and they did not match anything we used at the school. I brought them to the main office and left them on the counter with a note saying where I found them. The next night, when I arrived, the keys were gone. No one mentioned them. When I asked the guard, he said he never saw any keys on the counter. That was the first time I felt truly uneasy. It felt like proof that something was happening only when I was there. Later that same shift, I was cleaning a classroom when I heard a chair move behind me. Not fast, not loud, just enough to notice. I turned around expecting to see a chair out of place. Everything was exactly where it should be. The room looked untouched. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. The building was silent. From then on, I avoided that classroom whenever I could. I adjusted my schedule so it was cleaned earlier in the shift, when there was still some noise from outside and the guard was nearby. Even then, the feeling did not fully go away. One evening, I found writing on the whiteboard in one of the rooms. It was written in neat handwriting, the kind teachers used. It said, "Finish your work." I froze when I saw it. I knew no classes were using that room anymore. The board had been blank earlier in the week. I erased the message quickly, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. The rest of that night passed quietly, but my mind would not slow down. Every sound felt important, Every shadow felt closer than it should have been. I went home that morning exhausted, but sleep did not come easily. I kept thinking about that message on the board. It did not feel like a warning. It felt like a reminder. By the time all of this happened, my nights had started to blend together. I woke up tired, went to work tired, and came home with a tight feeling in my chest that never really went away. I stopped talking about work to my friends because I did not want to sound dramatic. I kept telling myself that once I got used to it, things would calm down. They did not. The older wing started to feel like a place that remembered things. I know that sounds odd, but it is the only way I can describe it. Certain hallways felt warmer, while others felt colder for no clear reason. Some lights flickered only when I walked beneath them. I reported it, but maintenance said everything was fine. One night, I found a cleaning cart parked outside the gym storage room. It was not mine. It was older, with chipped paint and supplies I had never seen before. The labels on the bottles were faded, and the cloths looked stiff, like they had been used for years. I stood there staring at it, feeling that same tight feeling in my chest. I pushed the cart into the storage room so it would not block the hallway. When I came back the next night, the cart was back in the hallway, placed neatly in the same spot. That was when I stopped touching it. Later that shift, I heard someone walking in the hallway above me. I was in the older science rooms on the first floor, and the sound came from the second floor directly overhead. The steps were slow and steady, like someone moving without any rush. I stood still and listened, expecting the guard to call out or a door to open. Nothing happened. The walking continued for a short while, then stopped. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. I realized I'd been holding my breath. Toward the end of the night, I had to clean the supply room near the back stairwell. I hated that area. The lights were weak, and the walls were covered with old notices that had never been taken down. As I swept the floor, I noticed writing scratched lightly into the paint near the door. It said, "Keep it clean." The words looked old, like they had been there for a long time. I ran my fingers over them without thinking. The paint around the letters felt smoother than the rest of the wall, as if it had been touched many times. I finished as fast as I could and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking, and I kept glancing over my shoulder as I walked back down the hallway. That night, when I checked my schedule, I saw that someone had added a note beside my name. It was written in pen, not typed like the rest. It said, "Basement storage." There was no basement storage on my list before. I stared at that note for a long time, feeling like something had been decided without me. The school felt quiet in a way that made my ears ring. I knew then that whatever was happening was no longer just small, strange moments. It felt organized. I stood there in the empty office staring at the schedule until my eyes started to blur. The note beside my name did not look rushed or careless. It looked deliberate, like someone had taken their time writing it. I checked the rest of the schedule to see if anyone else had notes like that. No one did. Just me. I waited until the end of my shift to deal with the basement storage. Part of me hoped the note would disappear or that a supervisor would mention it over the radio. Neither happened. As the building grew quieter, the idea of going downstairs settled heavy in my stomach. The entrance to the basement was through a narrow door near the back stairwell. I had passed it many times, but never gone inside. When I opened it, the smell of dust and old paper filled the air. The stairs were concrete, and the light at the bottom was already on, even though I had not touched any switch. The basement was larger than I expected. Rows of shelves held boxes of old records, broken furniture, and supplies that had not been used in years. The air felt still, like it had been trapped there for a long time. As I walked between the shelves, I noticed the floor was cleaner in certain paths, as if someone walked there often. Near the far wall, I found a small desk. On it sat a notebook, open to a page filled with neat handwriting. It listed dates and tasks, all written carefully. Cleaning duties, room numbers, notes about missed spots. The dates went back years. At the bottom of the page was a recent entry, that night's date. Beside it, my name. I felt dizzy when I saw it. I knew I had never been in that basement before. I had never written in that notebook. Still, the handwriting matched the notes I had seen around the school. Behind the desk was a chair, worn down and slightly crooked. The floor beneath it was cleaner than anywhere else in the basement. I understood then that someone had been spending a lot of time there. I did not finish the task. I closed the notebook, left it on the desk, and walked out without looking back. I did not run, but every step felt heavy, like the air itself was resisting me. The next morning, I called and quit. I did not give details. I just said I could not continue working there. No one argued with me. A few weeks later, I ran into an older custodian at a grocery store. When he found out where I had worked, his face went serious. He told me that years ago, a janitor had died in the school. He was known for staying late and keeping detailed notes about his work. He believed the building needed constant care. They said he never really left his job. I still think about that basement sometimes, about the notebook and the clean paths on the floor. I wonder if someone else is working nights there now, following notes they did not write, slowly becoming part of the routine. If you ever work alone at night, pay attention to what feels organized without you doing it. Some places remember the people who took care of them, and some do not like being neglected. I am writing this while sitting on my bed. Lights on, phone face down beside me. It is late, and the quiet always brings this memory back. I worked a lot of jobs when I was younger, but the one that still follows me is the time I worked as a janitor at a small medical office building. I am not trying to make this sound dramatic. I just want to explain it the way it felt, the way it happened. The building was 3 floors, nothing fancy. Doctors' offices during the day, empty and silent at night. I worked the evening shift, usually from 7 at night until around 2 in the morning. I liked that no one bothered me. I put on my headphones, cleaned, and went home. Simple. At first, the job was exactly that. Boring but calm. The first few weeks passed without anything strange. I learned the layout, memorized which lights flickered, which doors stuck, and which rooms needed extra time. I developed a routine. Start on the 3rd floor, work my way down, end in the basement where the storage rooms were. The basement was not creepy at first. It was just old. Concrete walls, low ceiling, shelves full of boxes and supplies that probably had not been touched in years. The air smelled stale, like dust and paper. I did not like being down there, but I did not hate it either. Things started to feel off about a month into the job. One night, while cleaning an exam room on the 2nd floor, I noticed the trash bin was already empty. That was odd because I clearly remembered not touching that room yet. I checked my list to make sure I had not skipped it by accident. I had not. I shrugged it off and replaced the liner anyway. Later that same night, I found a light on in a hallway I had already finished. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I had gone back through for any reason. I had not. I turned the light off and told myself I was just tired. That became my excuse for everything. Over the next few nights, small things kept happening. Doors slightly open when I was sure I closed them. Chairs pulled away from desks just enough to notice. Nothing obvious. Nothing I could point to and say something was wrong. Just enough to make me pause and think. I also started getting this feeling that I was being watched. Not in a dramatic way. More like the feeling you get when someone is standing nearby, but you have not seen them yet. I would turn around, expecting to see a coworker or security, and there would be no one there. I stopped wearing headphones after that. The silence felt safer somehow, even though it made every sound feel louder. One night, while mopping the first floor lobby, I noticed something written faintly on the glass of the front door. It looked like it had been written with a finger. Just one word. Clean. I wiped it away quickly and stood there longer than I meant to, staring at my reflection. The building was locked. No one had been inside but me. That was the moment I realized this job might not be as quiet as I thought. After that night, I tried to stay calm and logical about everything. I told myself that buildings collect habits, that people leave traces behind without meaning to. A medical office especially. Doctors, nurses, patients, cleaners before me. It made sense that the place felt busy even when it was empty. Still, I started changing the way I worked. I double-checked every room after I finished it. I paid closer attention to where I left things. I even started taking short notes on my phone, just to prove to myself that I had already cleaned certain areas. It helped a little, but not enough. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, especially in the basement. The basement lights were controlled by old switches near the stairs. Sometimes when I went down, the lights were already on. I told myself someone from maintenance must have been there earlier. Other nights, I would turn the lights on, do my work, and when I reached the far end, the lights near the stairs would be off again. I never saw them change. I just noticed they were different. One night, I found a bucket of water sitting in the middle of the basement floor. It was filled, clean, and still. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I had brought it down earlier. I had not. I always filled my buckets upstairs. I poured it out and put the bucket back where it belonged. My hands felt cold the rest of the night. After that, I started finding cleaning supplies moved slightly from where I left them. A cloth folded neatly instead of tossed into the bin. A bottle placed upright instead of on its side. These were small things, but they felt intentional, like someone correcting my work. What bothered me most was that it never felt rushed. Everything looked calm and careful. One evening, I noticed writing on a clipboard I kept in the supply room. Under my checklist, someone had written a short sentence in neat handwriting. "Duabike, not forget the corners." I stared at it for a long time. The supply room was locked. I was the only one with a key during my shift. I erased the sentence, but the thought stayed with me. From that point on, I cleaned every corner more carefully than before, without really meaning to. That night, the building felt quieter than usual. Even the usual background sounds seemed distant. As I worked, I had the strange feeling that I was being observed, not with anger, but with attention. Like someone was checking my progress. When my shift ended, I left quickly and did not look back. At home, I dreamed about hallways that never ended and floors that were never clean enough. I woke up tired and uneasy, already thinking about the next night. By the time I got to the third page of this story in my memory, the basement had become the place I both feared and dreaded the most. I started noticing patterns. Things only happened in certain areas, at certain times, mostly when alone. It felt like the building waited for me to be fully immersed in my work before showing me something I was not supposed to see. One night, I had to clean the old records room in the basement. It was a small space with metal shelves filled with files that looked decades old. The air was heavy, dusty, and smelled of old paper. I had cleaned this room before, but that night it felt different. The temperature dropped the moment I stepped inside. My breath became visible, even though the heater was on. As I organized the shelves, I noticed one file sticking out slightly from the rest. I reached for it, and the shelf behind me shifted just a little. I froze. There was no one else in the basement, I knew that. My heart started to race, and I tried to ignore it. When I opened the file, I found papers I had never seen before. Notes, checklists, even drawings of the rooms I cleaned. It was as if someone had been tracking every detail of my work. I put the file back, but the uneasy feeling did not leave. It felt like I had walked into someone's private space, even though the basement should have been abandoned. I turned to leave, but the path I had taken looked different somehow. The dust on the floor was disturbed, forming patterns I did not remember making. I could see where someone, or something, had moved before me. That was when I heard the sound of movement at the far end of the basement. Not fast, not like running, just deliberate, careful footsteps. I froze and listened. The sound moved slowly closer, but there was no shadow, no figure. I kept expecting a light to turn on or a door to open, but nothing happened. I left that basement as fast as I could, feeling the air press against my back. That night, I did not finish my work. I told the office I had an emergency and left early. On the way home, my mind was racing. I could not shake the idea that I was being watched, and worse, judged. I did not go back for 2 nights. When I finally returned, I found a note on my cleaning cart. It was neatly folded, not messy, and it had only 3 words written in the same careful handwriting I had seen in the file. "Good work tonight." I almost dropped the cart. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set it down. I did not touch the note. I just left it where it was and finished the shift as quickly as possible, feeling eyes on me the whole time. From that point on, I realized the building was no longer just a place I cleaned. It was something alive in its own way. It noticed details. It remembered routines. And I knew somehow it remembered me. By the time I reached what should have been my final week, I already knew I was not going to stay much longer. I felt tired in a way that sleep did not fix. Every night before work, I sat in my car longer than necessary, staring at the building and telling myself it was just another shift. Still, my hands always felt tense when I reached for the door. The Vafaraz building felt different after the note appeared on my cart. Not louder or more active, but more focused. Rooms I cleaned stayed exactly how I left them. Lights did not change. Doors stayed closed. It was almost like the place was satisfied, and that made me more uneasy than when things were moving around. On my second to last night, I decided to do something I had been avoiding. I went through the supply records in the office. I wanted to see who worked there before me. The files were old and incomplete, but I found one name that appeared again and again over many years. A janitor who worked nights, long shifts, rarely took time off. His notes were detailed, careful, and strict about routine. The record ended suddenly. No explanation, just a note saying his position was filled. That same night, while cleaning the basement, I noticed the notebook again, sitting on a shelf near where I had found it before. This time, it was open. A new page had been added. The handwriting was neat and steady. It listed every task I had completed that night. At the bottom, there was one final line. Almost done. I did not finish the shift. I closed the notebook, placed it back exactly where it was, and walked upstairs. I returned my keys the next morning and told my supervisor I was done. I did not explain. He looked relieved, like he had expected it. Years have passed since then. I do not work nights anymore. I do not take jobs that involve empty buildings or long routines. Sometimes, when I clean my apartment, I catch myself being extra careful, wiping corners I normally would ignore. When that happens, I stop and step away. I do not think the building wanted to hurt me. I think it wanted someone to continue the work, someone to notice details, someone to stay. I work as a janitor in an old office building at the edge of town. It is not a place people really notice. During the day, it looks normal enough. Glass doors, gray walls, quiet hallways. At night, though, it feels like a different building. I have been working there for a few years, mostly on the late shift, and I thought I understood all its sounds and habits. I was wrong. My shift usually starts around 7 in the evening. By then, most people are already gone. A few lights stay on in some offices, but the building slowly empties, floor by floor. I like the quiet. I put on my work jacket, grab my cart with cleaning supplies, and follow the same routine every night. Empty trash, clean desks, mop floors, locked doors. Simple work, honest work. That night felt normal at first, nothing strange. The air was a bit colder than usual, even though it was not winter yet. I remember thinking the air conditioning was set too low again. Management always ignored complaints. I pushed my cart into the elevator and pressed the button for the 5th floor, which was always the quietest. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Not broken, just slow. I stood there alone, listening to the soft hum of the machine. When the doors finally opened, the hallway lights were already dimmed, like they always are after business hours. The carpet looked darker under those lights, almost damp, even though I knew it was dry. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed something small but odd. One of the office doors was open. That almost never happened. Employees were strict about locking up. I stopped my cart and stared at the door for a moment. I told myself maybe someone had stayed late and forgotten. It was not my job to question it. Inside, the office looked empty. Chairs pushed in, computers off. I stepped in and started cleaning like usual. While wiping the desks, I had this strange feeling of being watched. I know that sounds dramatic, but it was more like a quiet pressure, not fear yet, just discomfort. I kept telling myself it was just the silence playing tricks on me. Late night work does that. I finished the room, closed the door, and moved on. As I walked away, I was sure I heard movement behind me. Not loud, just enough to make me pause. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. I laughed softly at myself and kept working. That was my first mistake. By the time I finished the 5th floor, my chest felt tight, like I had been holding my breath without realizing it. I decided to take the stairs down instead of the elevator. I wanted some movement, something to shake off the mood. The stairwell smelled old, like dust and metal. As I went down, I noticed something written on the wall near the 4th floor landing. It looked fresh, scratched into the paint. I leaned closer to read it, but the letters were messy and uneven. I could not understand what it said. I told myself it was just graffiti and walked away. but I could not stop thinking about it. That uneasy feeling followed me all the way down. At the time, I still believed I could finish my shift like any other night. I reached the 4th floor and pushed my cart out of the stairwell. The lights there were even dimmer than on the 5th floor. Some of them flickered, not turning off, just struggling to stay bright. I told myself the building was old and needed repairs. That explanation usually worked for most things. As I started cleaning, I noticed the trash bins were heavier than usual. That was strange because the 4th floor was mostly storage rooms and unused offices. Not many people worked there anymore. When I opened one of the bags, I expected papers or old food containers. Instead, I saw stacks of shredded documents, more than I had ever seen on one floor. The papers were not random. They all looked the same. Same type of paper, same dark ink. I did not read them closely, but I caught the same word repeated again and again across different pages. I could not explain why, but seeing that repetition made my stomach feel uneasy. I tied the bag and moved on without thinking too much about it. As I cleaned the hallway, I realized something else. My footsteps sounded different. Usually the carpet softened the sound, but that night, every step felt louder, like the building was listening. I slowed down, then stopped completely. The silence that followed felt thick, almost heavy. I stood there, holding the mop, waiting. Nothing happened. No sound, no movement. Still, I felt like I was not alone on that floor anymore. I continued toward the end of the hallway where the restrooms were. The men's restroom door was slightly open. I clearly remembered closing it earlier during my shift. I stood still for a few seconds, staring at the gap between the door and the frame. The light inside was on. I pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. Everything looked normal at first. Clean sinks, empty stalls, mirrors reflecting the dull light above. But when I walked closer to the sinks, I noticed the mirror looked wrong. Not broken, not dirty, just wrong. My reflection lagged slightly. When I moved my hand, it felt like the image followed a moment too late. I stared at myself, trying not to panic. I waved my hand again, slower this time. The delay was still there. I told myself I was tired. Long shifts can mess with your eyes. I turned away from the mirror and finished cleaning quickly. I did not look at it again. When I stepped back into the hallway, I felt relief for just a moment. Then I realized my cart was not where I left it. It was further down the hallway, closer to the stairwell, like someone had moved it while I was inside. I stood there, frozen, trying to think of a logical reason. Maybe another janitor. But I was the only one assigned to the building that night. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. That was when I heard slow movement coming from the stairwell door. Not fast, not loud, just steady, like someone taking their time. I grabbed the handle of my cart and waited, hoping I was wrong. I stayed still, holding the cart, listening to the quiet space around me. The movement from the stairwell did not stop. It sounded like someone slowly changing position, not rushing, not trying to hide. That calmness scared me more than anything sudden ever could. I cleared my throat and spoke, trying to sound normal. I said that the building was closed and asked if anyone was there. My voice sounded too loud in the hallway, and when it faded, the silence felt deeper than before. No answer came back. After a few seconds, the stairwell door opened. It was slow, almost careful. I could see a figure standing just inside the doorway. The light from the hallway did not fully reach them, so their face stayed unclear. They were wearing dark clothes, loose and dirty, like something that had been worn for years. I asked again if they needed help. The figure did not respond. They did not step forward either. They just stood there, facing me. I noticed then that they were holding a mop. Not mine. It looked older, the handle worn down, the head darkened like it had been used too many times without being cleaned. I felt a chill run through my arms. There was no record of another janitor working nights in that building. I knew the schedule. I had worked there long enough to know who belonged and who did not. The figure finally moved, stepping into the hallway. As they came closer, I realized something was off about the way they walked. Their movements were slow and stiff, like they were copying how a person should move instead of moving naturally. I backed up a little, keeping my eyes on them. When they were close enough, I could see their face more clearly. It looked tired, not angry, not threatening, just worn down, like someone who had been exhausted for a very long time. Their eyes focused on my uniform, then on my cart. They spoke quietly, asking me why I was using their supplies. Their voice was flat without emotion, like they were stating a simple fact. I tried to explain that I worked there, that I was assigned to the building. As I spoke, I noticed their expression did not change at all. They told me they had been cleaning that building for years. They said they never left, not even when the building was closed for renovations long ago. According to them, this was their job, and it always had been. I felt my hands shaking as I held the cart. I did not argue. I just nodded, hoping to calm the situation. I slowly pushed the cart back towards them and said they could take it. The figure looked at the cart and then back at me and said that was not how it worked. They told me the building only needed one janitor at night. The hallway lights flickered again, and for a brief moment, the figure looked thinner, almost faded, like they were not fully there. When the lights steadied, they were standing closer than before. I took a step back, my heart racing, realizing I needed to leave. I did not wait any longer. I turned and walked away as calmly as I could, even though every part of my body wanted to run. I headed straight for the elevator at the end of the hallway. I could feel the presence behind me, not chasing, not rushing, just following at the same slow pace as before. When I reached the elevator, I pressed the button and waited. The screen above the doors felt like it was taking forever to change. I kept my eyes forward, afraid that if I looked back, something would be closer than it should be. The elevator finally arrived, and the doors opened. I stepped inside and turned around just enough to see the hallway one last time. The figure was standing there, still holding the old mop, watching me without any expression. They did not try to stop me. They did not speak again. As the doors closed, I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. The ride down felt longer than any elevator ride I had ever taken. The lights inside flickered softly, and for a moment, I thought I saw another reflection in the metal wall beside mine. I did not look directly at it. When the doors opened on the ground floor, I pushed my way out and headed straight for the exit. I did not bother with the rest of my duties. I left my cart behind and walked into the night air, feeling like I had just escaped something that did not want to be seen by anyone else. I did not come back to work the next day. I told my supervisor I was sick. A few days later, I quit without giving much explanation. They did not try to stop me. In fact, they seemed relieved, like they expected it. Before my last paycheck arrived, I received an email from the building manager. It was short and polite. They thanked me for my service and mentioned that they would not be hiring a replacement for the night shift. I still think about that sometimes, wonder who cleans that building now, or if anyone does at all. That is my story. I have never gone back, and I never plan to. I have worked as a janitor for a long time, so I am used to empty buildings and quiet nights. Most people think it is an easy job, and in many ways it is. You clean, you lock doors, you go home. Still, when you work after everyone leaves, you start noticing things others never do. Sounds change. Spaces feel different. You become very aware of being alone. This happened a few years ago when I was assigned to clean a small community college building. It was not old in a dramatic way, just outdated. Long hallways, low ceilings, classrooms that all looked the same. During the day, it was full of students and noise. At night, it felt hollow, like the building was holding its breath. My shift started at 6 in the evening. By 7, almost everyone was gone. A few teachers stayed late sometimes, but that night the parking lot was nearly empty. I remember noticing that because it made the place feel more isolated than usual. I pushed my cleaning cart through the front doors and signed in at the security desk. No guard on duty, just a logbook and a camera screen showing empty hallways. I wrote my name, the time, and grabbed my keys. Everything felt normal. Too normal. I started on the first floor, cleaning classrooms one by one. Wipe the desks, empty the trash, sweep the floor. The usual routine. As I worked, I noticed the lights seemed dimmer than normal, even in rooms where I knew the bulbs had been replaced recently. I assumed it was my eyes adjusting to the evening. About an hour into my shift, I found a classroom that was unlocked. That was strange because teachers were usually careful about that. Inside, the room looked unused. No bags, no papers, nothing on the board. Still, the trash can was full. Not overflowing, just full enough to look like someone had been using the room recently. I tied the trash bag and pushed my cart back into the hallway. That was when I felt it. Not fear yet. Just the sense that someone else was nearby. I stopped and listened. The hallway was quiet, but the silence felt focused, like it was aimed at me. I told myself I was being silly. Long shifts do that to your head. I moved on to the next room, trying to ignore the feeling. But as I worked, I kept noticing small things. Doors I was sure I had closed were open again. Lights I had turned off were back on. I checked the time on my phone. It was not late at all. Still, I felt tired, heavier than I should have, like the building was slowly pressing down on me. That was the moment I realized this night was not going to be like the others. I moved on to the second floor, telling myself I just needed to stay focused. The stairs echoed under my feet more than usual, even though I was walking normally. The air felt cooler up there, and I rubbed my arms as I pushed my cart down the hallway. The second floor had offices and a few staff rooms. Most of them were empty and locked. As I worked, I noticed the smell of cleaning solution was stronger than usual. At first, I thought I had spilled something. But when I checked my supplies, everything was sealed. The smell seemed to come from the hallway itself, like the building had already been cleaned before I arrived. That thought stayed with me longer than I wanted. I kept cleaning, but the feeling of being late to my own job started to settle in. It was like I was following someone else's work instead of doing it myself. I reached a small break room at the end of the hall. The lights were on inside. I clearly remembered leaving that room for last, so I knew I had not been there yet. I stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the empty tables and chairs. The coffee machine was warm, as if it had been used recently. I stepped inside and looked around. The trash had been emptied. The counter was clean, too clean. It looked like someone had just finished working there. I felt a tight feeling in my chest that would not go away. As I turned to leave, I noticed something on the whiteboard near the door. There was writing on it in dark marker. It was not a message or a list. It was just my name, written over and over again, filling most of the board. The handwriting looked rushed, uneven, like it had been written in a hurry. I stood there, staring at it, trying to understand how that was possible. Only my supervisor and a few staff members knew my name, and none of them were there that night. I wiped the board clean with my sleeve. But the feeling did not fade. When I stepped back into the hallway, I heard slow movement from somewhere nearby. Not clear enough to place, but close enough to feel real. I called out, asking if anyone was still in the building. My voice sounded small and unsure. No answer came. I checked my phone again. Still no messages, no alerts. I thought about leaving early, but I needed the hours. I told myself to finish the floor and go home. As I pushed my cart toward the stairs, I noticed another cart parked near the stairwell. It looked old, older than the one I was using. The wheels were worn and the handle was wrapped with faded tape. I knew for a fact that the building only had one cart for the night shift. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, feeling the slow rise of fear I could no longer ignore. I did not touch the old cart. I stayed where I was, trying to slow my breathing and think clearly. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe the building used to have more staff. Maybe someone forgot to log out. Still, none of those thoughts helped much. I pushed my own cart past it and headed toward the next hallway. As I moved, I noticed something else. The floor was damp in places, like it had just been mopped. The smell of cleaning solution was stronger here, sharp and fresh, stronger than anything I had used that night. That was when I started to feel like I was not working alone. Not in the sense that someone was hiding and watching me, but like someone else had already been doing my job for a long time, longer than I could imagine. I entered one of the offices near the end of the hall. The light was already on. Inside, the desk was clean, the trash empty, and the floor spotless. There was nothing for me to do there. I stood in the middle of the room, feeling useless, like I did not belong. As I turned to leave, I noticed a reflection in the dark window. At first, I thought it was just me and the hallway light behind me. Then I realized the shape did not move when I moved. It stayed still, just behind my shoulder. I did not turn around right away. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my ears. Slowly, I turned my head just enough to look behind me. The room was empty. No one was there. When I looked back at the window, the reflection was gone. I backed out of the office and returned to the hallway. That was when I heard a voice. It was quiet, almost tired. It came from the direction of the stairwell. The voice said that I was doing things wrong. It said the floors needed more care. I tried to respond, but my throat felt dry. I managed to ask who was there. The voice answered calmly, saying it was the one who worked nights. The one who always worked nights. I took a few steps back, gripping the handle of my cart. I asked why I had never seen them before. The voice replied that I was not supposed to. The hallway lights dimmed slightly, and I felt a deep sense of dread settle over me. I knew then that if I stayed any longer, something would happen that I could not explain away. I decided to leave. I did not think about finishing my shift or explaining anything to anyone. I turned my cart around and headed straight for the stairs. Every step I took felt heavy, like the building was trying to slow me down without touching me. As I went down the stairs, the lights above me stayed on longer than they should have, then dimmed as I passed. It felt intentional, like the building was aware of where I was. I kept my eyes forward and focused on the exit sign at the bottom. When I reached the first floor, the hallway looked different. Not changed in a clear way, just slightly wrong. The walls felt closer together. The air felt thick, making it harder to breathe. I pushed my cart faster, my hands shaking. I passed the security desk on my way out. The logbook was still open. I glanced at it without meaning to. My name was written there more than once. Same time, same handwriting, line after line, like I had signed in over and over again. I did not stop to think about it. I walked out through the front doors and into the night. The cool air outside felt unreal, like I had stepped into a different world. I stood there for a moment, bent over, trying to calm myself. I never went back inside that building. The next day, I called my supervisor and told them I was quitting. I did not give details. They did not ask for any. There was a long pause on the line before they said they understood. A few weeks later, I ran into someone who still worked there. They told me the night shift had been removed. According to management, the building seemed to stay clean on its own. Floors polished, trash emptied. No clear explanation. Sometimes, when I drive past that place late at night, I see lights on in the second floor hallway. No cars in the lot. No staff on duty. I like to think I left something behind that night. Something that was never meant to follow me home. I hope it stays there, doing the job it believes belongs to it. I work as a janitor in a hospital, the kind that never really sleeps. Even late at night, there are lights on, machines running, and quiet footsteps moving somewhere far away. I took the night shift because it paid a little more, and because I thought I could handle being alone. I was wrong about that second part. I have been doing this job for about 3 years. Most nights are boring. Clean the hallways, empty trash, wipe down waiting areas, and make sure everything looks decent for the morning staff. I usually listen to music with one earbud in, just low enough so I can still hear if someone calls me. That night, I remember leaving the earbud out. I do not know why. Something told me I needed to hear the building clearly. My shift started at 10 in the evening. The hospital was quieter than usual. No visitors in the waiting area, no nurses chatting at the desk. Even the lights seemed dimmer, like someone had lowered them just a little too much. I signed in, grabbed my keys, and took my cart from the storage room. As I pushed the cart down the main hallway, I noticed the floor was already clean. Not just acceptable, but polished. I clearly remembered that hallway being my first task every night. I stood there for a moment, looking at the reflection of the ceiling lights on the floor. I told myself maybe the evening shift had extra time. I moved on to the east wing, which was usually empty at night. Offices, storage rooms, and a few unused patient rooms. That area always made me uncomfortable, but I never had a real reason for it. It just felt forgotten, like no one cared what happened there after dark. The first few rooms were normal. Trash half full, dust on the counters, floors needing work. I relaxed a bit, happy to see something familiar. But then I reached a room at the end of the hallway that stopped me cold. The door was open. Inside, the lights were on. The room was spotless. The bed was neatly made, even though no patient had used it in months. The trash was empty. The floor smelled strongly of cleaning solution, stronger than what I used. I stood in the doorway, confused. I checked my list. That room was assigned to me. No one else should have been there. That was when I felt it. Not fear yet, just the clear sense that I was late. Like I had arrived after someone else had already finished my job. I slowly backed away from the room, my eyes still fixed on it. And that was when I realized something else. There were faint marks on the floor, leading out of the room and down the hallway. The marks on the floor were not easy to see unless you looked closely. They were faint lines, like something heavy had been dragged slowly. I followed them with my eyes as they led farther down the hallway, past rooms that were supposed to stay locked at night. I told myself I was overthinking it. Hospitals are busy places. Things get moved around all the time. Still, I could not shake the feeling that those marks were meant to be noticed, like someone wanted me to follow them. I pushed my cart forward, moving carefully. The hallway felt longer than usual, stretching out in a way that made my steps feel slow. The lights above stayed on, but some of them buzzed softly, not loud enough to be obvious, just enough to make the silence uncomfortable. I reached the end of the hallway where the old service elevator was located. It had not been used in years, not since newer ones were installed. I was told it stayed locked. That night, the door was slightly open. I stopped a few steps away. Cold air drifted out from inside the elevator shaft, carrying the same strong smell of cleaning solution. My heart started to beat faster, and I had to remind myself to breathe. I called out, asking if anyone was there. My voice echoed down the empty hallway and faded without an answer. No one responded. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. I stepped closer and looked inside. The elevator car was there, sitting in the dark. The floor inside it was wet, like it had just been cleaned. I noticed an old janitor cart in the corner of the car. It looked nothing like mine. The metal was rusted, and the handle was worn smooth, like it had been used for a very long time. I knew then that something was wrong. The cart should not exist anymore. I'd seen old photos of staff from years ago, and the carts looked just like that one. I backed away slowly, my hands shaking. As I did, I noticed something else. The hallway behind me looked cleaner than it had a moment ago. The marks on the floor were gone. I turned in a slow circle, trying to understand what was happening. It felt like the building was being cleaned around me, quietly, carefully, without needing me. That was when I heard a voice behind me, calm and tired, asking why I was in the way. I froze. The voice was soft, almost like someone speaking out of habit rather than anger. It came from the direction of the old service elevator. I could not see anyone, but I knew someone or something was there. My hands gripped the handle of my cart, my fingers turning white. I asked the voice who it was. There was no answer at first, just the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above. Then it spoke again. It said it had been working nights for longer than anyone remembered, that it had been cleaning the building before I ever arrived, and that it would continue long after I was gone. I wanted to run, but my legs felt stiff. I could not move quickly, as if the air itself had grown heavy around me. I realized I was not just in the building alone. I was in its presence. It did not approach me aggressively. It did not need to. The feeling of being watched, of being observed with quiet patience, was worse than any sudden threat. I tried to tell myself it was just a hallucination, exhaustion from too many late shifts. I told myself hospitals are strange at night, quiet except for the machines, full of shadows that play tricks on your eyes. But deep down, I knew this was different. I noticed the hallway lights flickering. Each flicker revealed something new. The walls looked older, dirtier, as if they had been untouched for decades. The floor reflected the lights unevenly, like water had been spilled and not dried. And when the lights stayed on, the old janitor cart from the elevator was no longer in the elevator. It was in the hallway, a few feet behind me, though I had not seen it move. I could not explain it. I wanted to run, but fear held me in place. The voice spoke again, quiet and patient, telling me that I was supposed to leave, that the night shift belonged to it. It said that humans were only temporary helpers, and sometimes they forgot the rules. I finally forced myself to turn and walk backward, never taking my eyes off the cart or the shadows around it. Every step I took felt heavy, but I kept moving, trying not to panic. I reached the main hallway, where the lights seemed more normal, but the feeling of being followed never left me. By the time I reached the lobby, I was shaking. My shift was far from over, but I could not stay another minute. I grabbed my bag and ran out the front doors, leaving my cart behind. The hospital looked normal from the outside, quiet and empty in the parking lot. But I knew it was not empty. I did not return to work the next night. I called my supervisor and said I was sick, though I was far from it. I could not explain what had happened, and I knew no one would believe me. After that, I asked for a different shift, one in the daytime, and eventually transferred to another building entirely. Even now, years later, I think about that night. I think about the cart in the hallway, the quiet voice, and the sense that the building had been alive in a way no one else could see. I wonder if the janitor I met that night, if it was a janitor, has been cleaning the hospital all along, long before I arrived and long after I left. Sometimes, when I walk past that hospital during the day, it looks ordinary, busy, full of staff, patients, and visitors. But at night, when the world is quiet and the doors are locked, I imagine it differently. I imagine the floors polished, the trash emptied, the hallways spotless. And somewhere in the dark corners, the old janitor moves silently, doing a job that will never end. I tell this story not to scare people, but to remind myself of what I experienced. To remember that some places are not empty, even when they seem to be. And to never ignore that feeling that something is already there, waiting, quietly doing its work. I have never gone back. I do not plan to. But I will never forget that night. And I will never forget the quiet presence that made me understand that some jobs are meant for more than one lifetime. I have never told this story out loud before. It feels strange even typing it now, like saying it makes it more real. But it is late, and the house is quiet. And this is the kind of story that only comes out at night. I was not looking for anything scary to happen. I was just doing my job. I was a janitor. At the time, I worked the night shift at a small office building on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. 3 floors, old carpet, flickering lights, and the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel louder than it should. I took the job because it paid steady and did not require much talking. You come in after everyone leaves, clean up their mess, and go home. Simple. Most nights were the same. I would clock in at 10, put on my gloves, and start with the first floor. Trash cans, bathrooms, vacuuming. I listened to podcasts or music through one earbud, keeping the other ear free just in case. That building had a lot of little noises, Pipes knocking, air vents breathing, doors settling. You learn to ignore them. I actually liked being alone there. It gave me time to think. Sometimes I talked to myself quietly, just to hear a human voice. I never felt scared at first. Not really. The first odd thing happened about 2 weeks into the job. I was cleaning the 3rd floor, which was mostly empty offices used for storage. I clearly remember mopping the hallway near the supply closet. I always locked that closet behind me because it held chemicals, and management was strict about it. When I came back 10 minutes later, the door was open. I stood there for a moment, holding the mop, just staring at it. I told myself I must have forgotten to lock it. That happens. People make mistakes. Still, I remember feeling a small pinch of worry in my chest. I checked inside. Nothing was missing. Buckets, bottles, paper towels, all where they should be. I locked it again, harder this time, and moved on. Over the next few nights, small things like that kept happening. A trash can I knew I had emptied would be full again. Lights I turned off would be back on when I passed the same area later. Once, I found wet footprints near the men's bathroom, even though no one else should have been there, and I had not mopped that area yet. I mentioned it to my supervisor. He laughed and said the building was old and probably haunted. He said it like a joke. But something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable, like he was brushing it off too fast. I did not push it. I needed the job. The building had cameras, but they were mostly for show. Half of them did not work, and the screens in the security office were usually dark. I was not supposed to be in there, but one night curiosity got the better of me. I wanted proof that I was not losing my mind. I checked the logbook. According to it, I was the only one clocked in. No security guard, no other cleaners, just me. That night, the quiet felt heavier. My footsteps sounded too loud, even though I was walking normally. I kept thinking I heard someone else walking a second behind me, but every time I stopped, the sound stopped too. I blamed my nerves and tried to focus on my routine. Around 1 a.m, I was cleaning an office on the 2nd floor. I was wiping down desks when I noticed a smell. It was faint, but wrong. Not trash, not chemicals. It smelled damp, like old water and something else I could not place. Like a basement that had been closed up for years. The smell seemed strongest near the corner of the room. I crouched down and looked under the desk. There was nothing there, just dust and an old power strip. Still, my stomach felt tight, and I could not explain why. As I stood up, I heard it. A slow, dragging sound. It came from the hallway outside the office, not footsteps, more like something being pulled across the floor. I froze. I told myself it was a chair shifting or the building settling. But it kept going. Slow, steady, getting closer. I held my breath and listened. Then, very clearly, I heard someone whisper my name. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and calm, like they were right outside the door and did not want to be heard by anyone else. No one should have known my name. I stood there for a long time, too scared to move, my heart beating so hard it made my ears ring. The whisper did not come again. The dragging sound stopped. After a while, the silence returned, thicker than before. I did not finish cleaning that office. I locked it and moved on, telling myself I would report it later. I kept working, but I could not shake the feeling that I was no longer alone in that building. That was only the beginning. I wish I could say I went home after that, but I did not. I stayed. I told myself that leaving early would only make things worse in my head. I needed to act normal. So I pushed my cart down the hallway and kept cleaning, even though my hands were shaking. The rest of that shift felt stretched out, like time was moving slower just to mess with me. Every light felt too bright, and every dark corner felt deeper than it should have. I kept turning around because I felt watched, but there was never anyone there. Just empty hallways and closed doors. When my shift finally ended, I walked to my car as fast as I could without running. I sat inside for a few minutes before starting the engine, just breathing and calming myself down. I told myself I was tired. Anyone working nights would imagine things eventually. That made sense. At least it did at the time. The next night, I almost called in sick. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, staring at the screen. But I needed the money, and I did not want to look weak. So I went back. The building looked normal when I arrived. Same dull walls, same quiet parking lot. I signed in and started my routine again. I avoided the second floor at first and focused on the first. I tried to stay busy so my mind would not wander. About an hour in, I noticed something strange on my cart. My keys were gone. I always clipped them to my belt, always. I checked my pockets, my cart, the floor around me. Nothing. I felt that tight feeling in my chest again. I knew I had them when I came in. I had unlocked doors with them. I retraced my steps, slowly, carefully. I kept thinking I would find them sitting somewhere obvious, and I would feel foolish for panicking. But when I reached the supply closet on the first floor, I stopped. My keys were on the floor in front of the door, neatly placed, not dropped, lined up side by side, like someone had taken the time to arrange them. I stood there staring at them, my mouth dry. I did not want to touch them. I felt like once I did, something else would happen, something worse. But I needed them, so I picked them up and clipped them back onto my belt. That was when I noticed the smell again, that same damp, closed-up smell. It felt stronger now, like it was following me. I tried to breathe through my mouth and ignore it. I finished the first floor and moved to the second, even though every part of me did not want to. The hallway where I heard my name before looked the same as always. Clean, empty, quiet. I started vacuuming, pushing the machine slowly, trying not to rush. Halfway down the hall, I realized something was wrong with the offices on my left. Their doors were open. I knew I had closed them the night before. I always did. Open doors meant more work, more dust, more checking. But now, they were open, all of them, like they were waiting. I stood there for a long time, staring down the row of dark rooms. I felt like if I stepped into one, I would not come back out the same. Still, I forced myself to start with the first office. Inside, the air felt heavy. The lights flickered more than usual, and my skin felt cold even though the heater was running. As I cleaned, I noticed faint marks on the carpet. Long marks, like something had been dragged across it again and again. They led toward the back of the room, right up to the wall. There was nothing there. I backed out of that office and shut the door. My heart was racing, and my head was full of noise, even though the building was silent. I decided then that I would finish as fast as possible and leave early if I had to. That was when I heard someone breathing behind me. Slow, calm, too close. I did not turn around right away. I was afraid of what I might see if I did. After a few seconds, the breathing stopped. When I finally looked, the hallway was empty again. But I knew, deep down, that something was moving through that building with me. something that noticed what I cleaned, something that noticed me. After that moment in the hallway, I stopped pretending everything was fine. I finished only what I absolutely had to and stayed close to the lights. I kept telling myself that if I could just make it to the end of the shift, I would be okay. I watched the clock on my phone more than I worked. The smell came and went as I moved through the second floor. Sometimes it was barely there, and other times it felt thick, like it was sitting in my throat. Every time it got stronger, I felt that same sense of being watched. Not rushed, not threatened, just observed. I started noticing something else too. Trash cans I had emptied minutes before were full again, but not with normal trash. Papers I had never seen before. Old forms with faded ink. Some were so worn they almost fell apart in my hands. They looked like they belonged to a different time. One paper caught my attention. It was a maintenance report from years ago. The name at the bottom was smudged, but the job title was clear: Janitor. I felt cold when I read it. I had never seen old records like that mixed in with normal trash. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket without really knowing why. I just felt like I should keep it. By the time I reached the third floor, I was exhausted. Not just tired, but drained. Like something had been slowly pulling energy out of me all night. The lights up there were dimmer than usual. A few did not turn on at all. I told myself I would only clean the main hallway and leave the storage rooms for another night. As I pushed my cart forward, I noticed the supply closet again. The door was open. I stopped several feet away from it. I knew for a fact I had locked it earlier. I stood there, staring at the dark space inside. The smell was strongest there. It felt like the air was heavier around that door. Very slowly, I stepped closer and looked inside. The shelves were still there, but everything on them was wrong. The bottles were empty and dusty, like they had not been used in years. The mop bucket was dry and cracked. It looked nothing like the closet I used every night. Then I noticed something in the corner. There was a cart, an old one, rusted. The kind they used before the building was remodeled. Hanging from the handle was a name badge. It had my name on it. Same spelling, same last name. Even the photo looked like me, only tired and pale, like someone who had not slept in a long time. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I told myself it was a joke, a mistake, someone trying to scare me. But deep down, I knew that was not true. Behind me, one of the hallway lights turned off, then another. Slowly, the hallway grew darker. I felt panic rise in my chest. I turned to leave, pushing my cart as fast as I could. That was when I realized the floor felt wet under my shoes. I looked down and saw faint marks forming behind me, stretching down the hallway. I did not look back again. I made it to the stairs and rushed down to the first floor. The lights there were still on, bright and normal, like nothing was wrong. I stood near the exit, breathing hard, trying to calm myself. That was when I noticed the clock above the door. It said 2 in the morning. I checked my phone. Same time. I knew my shift should have ended already. I knew I had been working for hours longer than I thought. I walked toward the door to leave. It did not open. I pulled again, harder. Nothing. I looked down and saw my keys were gone. Behind me, I felt that calm presence again, close, patient. And I understood something then. It was not angry. It was not trying to scare me. It was teaching me how to stay. I stood there at the door, holding the handle, feeling like my arms were made of stone. I did not want to turn around. I knew if I did, something in me would break, so I stayed facing the exit, staring at the glass, hoping it would suddenly open, hoping I would wake up. The calm presence behind me did not rush me. It never did. That was the worst part. It felt like it had all the time in the world, and I had none. I heard a quiet voice behind me, low and steady. It did not raise its volume. It did not sound angry. It sounded tired. It said that the building always needed someone. Someone to clean. Someone to stay after everyone else left. Someone who did not ask too many questions. I wanted to scream that it was wrong, that I had a life outside this place. I wanted to tell it I was not the person it was looking for. But my mouth would not move. My body felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing me down. The voice talked about routines, about keeping the floors clean so no one would notice the marks, about emptying trash so old things could be thrown away and forgotten, about fixing small messes before they became problems. As it spoke, images filled my head. Not clear pictures, but feelings. Long nights, endless hallways, the same lights turning on and off, over and over again. I realized then that the papers I found were not trash. They were pieces of people. People who had worked here. People who had stayed too long. People who slowly stopped. Going home. The voice said it was tired. It had been doing this alone for a long time. It needed help. I felt something being placed around my waist. I looked down and saw my keys clipped back onto my belt. My cart was beside me again, clean and ready. Everything felt strangely normal, like this was how things were always supposed to be. The door behind the glass was no longer the way out. It felt distant, like something I remembered from another life. The voice faded, but the feeling stayed. That calm, watching presence moved away, deeper into the building like it trusted me now. The clock on the wall changed. It no longer showed a time I recognized. It just showed that it was night. I do not remember leaving that building. I only remember cleaning. I remember learning the sounds and the smells. I remember understanding which lights to turn off and which to leave on. I am home now. At least, I think I am. I sit here at night and write this because I feel like if I stop, I might forget who I was before. My clothes still smell like that building sometimes. My keys still feel heavy in my pocket. Tomorrow night, I go back. I tell myself it is just a job, that I can leave whenever I want. But deep down, I know the building is patient, and it knows my routine. I never thought being a janitor would give me something like this to talk about. It was just a job, nothing special. I cleaned floors, emptied trash, wiped down desks, and went home. That was the plan. I am writing this now because I still cannot sleep properly. And when the house gets quiet, my mind goes back there. I worked the night shift at a public high school. Old building, long hallways, lockers that had seen better days. During the day, the place was loud and full of people. At night, it felt like a different world. Empty, still, and way too quiet. I took the job because nights paid a little better, and I liked being alone. No teachers watching, no students making a mess right after you cleaned. Just me, my cart, and my routine. I started at 9 every night and usually finished around 5 in the morning. At first, everything felt normal. The building had its usual sounds, air systems running, distant hum from machines. Nothing that bothered me. I would start on the first floor, then move up. I listened to music most nights, just low enough so I could still hear what was going on around me. After about a month, small things started to feel off. Not scary, just strange. I would clean a hallway, turn off the lights, then come back later and see the lights on again. I told myself I probably forgot. I was tired. That happens. One night, I found a trash bag already tied and sitting neatly next to a can I had not touched yet. I stood there for a minute, trying to remember if I did it earlier. I could not remember doing it, but I did not think much of it. My nights blended together sometimes. The school had an old wing that was barely used anymore. A few storage rooms and classrooms filled with broken desks. I was supposed to clean it once a week. I did not like that area, but not because of fear. It just felt colder there, like the heat did not reach it properly. The first time something really bothered me was in that wing. I was sweeping one of the classrooms when I noticed footprints on the floor, dusty ones. They went from the doorway to the teacher's desk and stopped there. I stood still and stared at them. They looked fresh. I knew they were not mine. The shape was wrong. Smaller, flatter. I thought maybe another staff member came through earlier, but no one was supposed to be there at night besides me. I swept the floor, removing the prints, and finished the room quickly. As I left, I felt that quiet feeling again, like the building was paying attention. On my way out of the wing, I noticed the door was already unlocked. I always locked it behind me. Always. I checked my keys, thinking maybe I used the wrong one, but the lock was open. I remember standing there, keys in my hand, telling myself not to overthink it. Old buildings have old locks. That was my excuse. Still, when I went home that morning, I double-checked that my own front door was locked. I slept with the light on, which I had not done since I was a kid. That was only the beginning. The next few nights went by without anything major happening, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. It was like a quiet pressure in the back of my mind. I kept telling myself that once you notice one strange thing, you start noticing everything. That made sense, at least on the surface. I tried to stick to my routine as closely as possible. Same order, same paths, same timing. I felt safer that way, like the building would not surprise me if I did things the same every night. Then I started finding my cart moved. Not far, just a few feet from where I left it. At first, I honestly thought I was the one moving it without realizing. I work on autopilot sometimes. But one night, I left the cart in the middle of a hallway and went into a bathroom to clean. When I came back out, the cart was at the far end of the hall, lined up neatly against the wall. I stood there staring at it, feeling foolish and uncomfortable at the same time. No one else should have been in the building. I checked the sign and book, just my name. The old wing started bothering me more after that. I felt drawn to it, even on nights when I was not scheduled to clean it. I would catch myself standing near the doorway, looking down the dark hallway without realizing how long I had been there. One night, while cleaning nearby, I noticed the lights in that wing were on. I knew I had not turned them on. I had not even gone in there yet. I walked down the hallway slowly, my footsteps sounding too loud in the silence. The air felt heavier the farther I went. Not colder, just thick, like it had been sitting there all day. In one of the storage rooms, I found something that made my stomach turn. There was a cleaning schedule pinned to the wall. It looked old, yellowed around the edges. Names were written in pencil, faded but still readable. At the bottom of the list was my name. Same handwriting as the others, same style, like it had always been there. I told myself it had to be a joke, someone messing with me. But I did not know who would go through the effort. Most people barely noticed the janitors at all. I took the paper down and folded it. I do not know why I did that. I think part of me wanted proof that I was not imagining things. As I turned to leave, I noticed something else. The floor had been cleaned, not just swept, but properly cleaned, like someone had spent time on it. I knew I had not done it. The smell of cleaning solution was faint, but familiar. The same brand we used. That was the first time it really hit me. Someone else was working with me, or something was. I finished the rest of my shift in a fog. I kept expecting to see someone at the end of a hallway or standing in a doorway, but it never happened. Just that feeling of being followed, calmly and quietly. When I got home, I checked the folded paper again. My name was still there. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I pictured empty hallways and lights turning on by themselves. The next night, I thought about calling my supervisor. I even picked up the phone. But what would I say? That the building was helping me clean? That my name was on an old schedule? I went back instead. That night, the school felt different the moment I walked in. Too clean, too organized, like someone had been preparing for me. And I realized something that made my chest feel tight. None of the trash cans were full. Seeing all those empty trash cans should have made my job easier, but instead, it made my skin feel tight. Schools are never that clean, not even after events or holidays. There is always something left behind. A wrapper, a paper, something. But that night, it felt like the building had already been taken care of. I walked the first floor slowly, checking each room. Desks were wiped, floors were clean, chairs were pushed in neatly. It was better than I usually left it. I started to feel useless, like I had shown up late to my own shift. As I moved deeper into the building, I noticed something else. My supplies were different. Bottles were refilled. Rags were folded the way I preferred, even though I never showed anyone how I liked them. My cart felt familiar, but also not fully mine anymore. I kept thinking about that schedule with my name on it. The way it looked old, like it had been there longer than I had. I pulled it out of my pocket and looked at it again. Under my name, written very faintly, were dates. They were not recent. Some of them went back years. My throat felt dry. I had only worked there a few months. There was no reason for my name to be connected to dates that old. I went up to the second floor, trying to stay focused. As I cleaned, I noticed doors opening after I passed them. Not all at once. Just one here, one there. Enough to make me doubt myself. Enough to keep me checking over my shoulder. In one classroom, I found a chair pulled out in front of the board. On the desk was a set of keys. They looked exactly like mine. I picked them up slowly and turned them over in my hand. Same keychain, same worn metal. I reached into my pocket to check, and my keys were still there. I put the other set down and stepped back. My heart was beating hard now. I felt like I was standing in someone else's place, doing someone else's job. That was when I heard breathing in the hallway. Slow and steady, not rushed. It felt close, like it was just out of sight. I stayed very still, afraid that moving would make it worse. A quiet voice spoke, calm and tired. It did not sound angry or threatening. It sounded like someone who had been doing the same thing for a very long time. It said that the building always needed care, that places like this remembered the people who stayed late, the ones who cleaned up after everyone else and were forgotten in the morning. I did not see anyone, but I felt understood in a way that scared me. The voice talked about routines and responsibility. about how some people never really leave once they become part of the place. I backed out of the room and made my way toward the exit, my legs feeling heavy. The lights behind me stayed on, guiding me like they wanted me to keep going deeper instead. I reached the main doors and tried to leave. They did not move. I checked the time on my phone. It said 3 in the morning, but it felt much later. I looked back down the hallway. My cart was there, waiting, perfectly lined up. Clean, ready. I understood then that I was not being chased. I was being invited. I stood at the doors for a long time, my hand resting on the handle, feeling the weight of the building behind me. The lights above did not flicker or fade. They stayed steady, calm, like everything was under control. That made it worse. If something had felt broken, I could have blamed it on the building falling apart. But it felt aware, patient. I turned around slowly. The hallway looked normal, but it also felt different, like I was seeing it from the wrong side of things. My cart was exactly where it always ended up at the end of a shift. The supplies were restocked. The floor beneath it looked clean enough to shine. The quiet voice came again, not from one direction, but from the space itself. It spoke about how every place needs someone who stays, someone who notices the small messes, someone who fixes things before anyone else sees them. It explained, in its own tired way, that people come and go, but the work never ends. When one person leaves, another takes their place. Sometimes the building chooses. Sometimes people stay without realizing it. I felt memories press into my thoughts that were not fully mine. Long nights, the same routes walked again and again, cleaning the same rooms until they felt like home. I felt a strange comfort mixed with fear, like being wrapped in something familiar that I knew I should run from. My keys felt heavy at my side. When I looked down, they were clipped to my belt, even though I did not remember putting them there. My name was written on a small label attached to the cart. Clean, clear, permanent. I realized then that the other janitors on that old schedule had not quit. They had stayed, slowly, quietly, until the building no longer needed their names written down. The doors behind me did not feel like an exit anymore. They felt like part of a story that had already ended. I do not remember leaving the school that night. I only remember cleaning until the feeling of time stopped mattering. When I finally found myself outside, the sky was starting to change, like morning was close. I still work there. During the day, I feel normal. But at night, when the halls are empty, I feel the building watching, waiting. Sometimes I find work already done. Sometimes I find old supplies arranged just the way I like them. I am writing this now because I need to remember who I was before the routine became so easy. Before staying late felt natural. If you ever work nights as a janitor and things start feeling too organized, too helpful, be careful. Some places do not want to be left alone,